Hi there, and welcome to Ghostly Trails. I'm Paul Barrand, and today you join us in the city of Nottingham in the east of England. The city is also the county town of Nottinghamshire, with the settlement being granted its city charter in 1897 as part of Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee celebrations. The early history of Nottingham dates back to 919 AD, where King Edward the Elder captured Nottingham and in which he built a fortress on the southern bank of the River Trent in 921 AD. During the Norman conquest, King William the Conqueror built a castle in Nottingham which was entrusted to William Peveril. The Anglo-Saxon settlement was originally confined to the area known today as the Lace Market, and was surrounded by a substantial defensive ditch and rampart which fell out of use following the Norman conquest and was filled by the time of the Domesday Book in 1086. Following the Norman conquest, the Saxon settlement developed into the English borough of Nottingham, and housed a town hall and law courts. The settlement also developed around the castle on the hill opposite, and was the French borough supporting the Normans in the castle. Eventually, the space between was built on, as the town grew and the old market square became the focus of Nottingham several centuries later. Come with us as we take you on a tour of key locations in the county, famed for their stories of ghostly apparitions. And we will start with arguably one of the most haunted places in the UK, Wollaton Hall. Wollaton Hall is a striking Elizabethan mansion designed by Robert Smithson to be the home of Sir Francis Willoughby. Construction began in 1580 on the prominent hilltop site and took 8 years to complete, after which the Willoughbys enjoyed several generations in the sanctuary of their very grand home. In 1881, however, the Willoughbys fled the hall, citing that it was too near the smoke and busy activity of a large manufacturing town. In 1925, it was purchased by Nottingham City Council and is now home to the Nottingham Natural History Museum. Those who are fans of Christopher Nolan's Batman films will most certainly recognise the hall as Wayne Manor, home of Batman's alter ego millionaire Bruce Wayne. You would think that the Batcave, hiding below the house, would be firmly rooted in fiction, but in fact the wine cellar really does have access to sandstone caves, one of which is a water reservoir known as the Admiral's Bath. It is here that Admiral Sir Nesbitt Josiah Willoughby of Aspley Hall was said to have taken his ablutions. Each of the hall's 4 corner towers have spiral staircases, and there is one staircase of 200 steps which leads out onto the half roof. On the south side of the hall are formal gardens with statues and an ornamental pond. If the stories are to be believed, all of these locations are the haunt of paranormal activity. Some say that the hall is haunted by the spirit of Charlotte, who fell down the staircase and is still in the room where she died. There felt feelings of coldness, vengeful fury, and desperation on the staircase where she fell. Others say that the hall is haunted by a white lady, leaves the rear of the hall and heads towards the orangery and stable block. Then there is a ghost named Charlie, with claims of footsteps on the stairs, followed by a knock on the door in the stable block, even though nobody has ever been seen there. Perhaps the most frequently reported supernatural activity can be found at the window of room 19. On dark nights, a strange orange glow emanates through the glass. supposedly the boudoir of Lady Jane Middleton and the room in which she died. It was also the room in which Lady Middleton was confined to after she fell and became partly paralysed. At the time of the referenced news article, there are a number of full-time staff living at the Hall. One of these, Donald Wyatt, lived with his wife in a flat in the stable block, having been an attendant for 6 years. In the article, Donald recalls the first time he witnessed a strange orange light. In 1971, another resident at the Hall, gardener Dick Barlow, and his wife were returning home from a shopping trip to Long Eaton. Strolling towards the Hall through the park, they saw a light in one of the windows. With it being long past public opening hours, Dick went straight to Donald's flat to report what he had seen. Both men gazed out of the window of the flat to confirm the fact that there was indeed an orange glow coming from room 19. Presuming that someone had forced entry into the hall, they set off to investigate, but first they armed themselves with, as Donald said,
air rifles and pickaxes and anything we could lay our hands on.
As the pair completed the short distance between the hall and stable block, the orange light faded and disappeared completely. On entering the hall, they found that, as was the case when the building was not in use, the electricity was switched off at the mains. No one was present in the building. The burglar alarm had not been activated and the door to room 19 was locked. The perplexing phenomenon no doubt kept both men up at night pondering, until 3 years later in 1974 when Donald claimed to see the strange light once again. But this time he didn't investigate.
It was about 8:15 when I saw it again. Half an hour later it was still on. I called my wife and she saw it as well.
Is it a coincidence that room 19 is just below the half-roof, said to be haunted by the White Lady? More central to the city sits Nottingham Castle. It was built on the site of a Norman castle, construction of which began in 1068 on a sandstone outcrop by the River Leen and added to extensively through the medieval period. It was an important royal fortress and occasional royal residence, but decline by the 16th century meant that the original castle, except for its walls and gates, was demolished after the English Civil War in 1651. The site occupies a commanding position on a natural promontory known as Castle Rock, which dominates the city skyline, with high cliffs to the south and west. On the return of King Richard the Lionheart from the Crusades in 1194, the castle was occupied by supporters of Prince John, including the Sheriff of Nottingham. It was besieged by Richard and, after a sharp conflict, was captured in the legends of Robin Hood. Nottingham Castle is the scene of the final showdown between the sheriff and the hero outlaw. Just a stone's throw from Nottingham Castle, the houses of Standard Hill have sat for almost 200 years, named so thanks to Charles I, flying his standard here during the Civil War. Reports of ghostly sightings in the area began to emerge in 1921, which alarmed the tenants to the extent that they dared not step outside after dark. It's wisely thought that the ghost of the Earl of March, Roger Mortimer, haunts the castle, as well as an underground passage known as Mortimer's Hole. The story goes that on the night of October the 19th, 1330, the Queen and her lover Mortimer were staying at Nottingham Castle. The young King Edward III, keen to expose his feckless mother and avenge his father who had been killed by Mortimer, entered a network of secret tunnels that led ultimately into the castle itself. Accompanied by a band of loyal supporters, the king burst into his mother's bedroom and surprised the lovers. Edward himself is said to have made an attempt on Mortimer, but according to legend, the now doomed monarch killer was led away, to Isabel's mournful cries of, "Fair son, have pity on the gentle Mortimer." Sir Roger was imprisoned in the castle, before being taken to London, where he was executed as a traitor. On the 29th of November 1330, he was hanged, drawn, and quartered, and his remains were skewered on spikes and left on Traitor's Gate as a grisly reminder of his deed. A shadowy form, accompanied by phantom footsteps, is said to appear on Standard Hill from time to time. One brave householder decided to try and uncover the reason for the haunting, and kept watch in the tunnel one night. He said that he turned the light low and waited. Soon he heard the footsteps ascending from the basement and heard a strange rustling of paper. He challenged the unseen visitor, but the sounds gradually retreated, as if the visitor was retracing his steps. The account of this ghostly activity resulted in a large influx of tourists and visitors, keen to inspect Mortimer's Hole, which sometimes meant the local police had to guard its entrance. The legend of the ghost continues today, and has even spread to the nearby Ye Olde Trip to Jerusalem, built into the rock of Nottingham Castle, which is our next port of call. Ye Olde Trip to Jerusalem is believed to have been built in 1189, and suggested to have been a pit stop for Crusader knights, including none other than Richard the Lionheart. In the snug hangs a portrait of an unknown woman, dressed in Victorian-style attire. Upon a fairly recent renovation in the pub, the painting was removed, but when it was placed back on a different wall, several regulars noted that the usually dour-looking woman now had a smile raising from the corner of her mouth. Perhaps she approved of a much better view. However, the real talking point in the pub, known locally as the Trip, is housed in the Rock Lounge located on the second floor. The Cursed Galleon is infamous not only in Nottingham but in the wider paranormal community. Legend has it that a visiting sailor gifted the wooden model galleon to the pub. The model ship hung downstairs for many years and collected copious amounts of dust, literally hanging from floor to ceiling. The tale continues that shortly after the galleon was cleaned and relocated elsewhere in the pub, the individual who took on the task apparently passed away. Indeed, the last 3 people to have handled the galleon have all met with a mysterious end soon after doing so. Landlords thereafter refused to let anyone clean the galleon over the years, hence its grimy condition, and this also explains why the model was placed in a glass case by a spiritualist many decades ago. Over the past few years, ghost hunters have run several paranormal investigations at the Trip. On one occasion, they were on a break during a tour, and some of the guests and team were in the beer garden, when, out of nowhere, there was a mighty crash, which hit the tent above the beer garden. Thinking it was someone who had perhaps jumped from the castle wall, what they saw next astounded them. For on the ceiling of the tent, crawling along, were handprints, which then disappeared. The Rock Lounge also seems to be a hotbed for other supernatural activity. Things such as keys disappear only to turn up later in odd places. Glasses and bottles have been known to fly off the shelves and smash as if flung by invisible hands. Some staff have heard the sound of breaking glass coming from the bar and armed themselves with a dustpan and brush to clear it up, only to find no debris exists. The ghosts of a man and woman have also been seen by previous landlords. They've been heard calling out, despite the pub being empty of customers. The woman, wearing what appears to be crinoline skirts, was also sighted walking down the stairs into the cellars. The caves are also said to be haunted by a negative entity and a pirate. The former causes violent poltergeist activity, such as throwing stones and pushing people. It's also said to cause the smell of sulphur. The pirate is believed to have drowned in a well while hiding in one of the caves. Roman soldiers have also been seen emerging from the wall, marching through the cellar, and disappearing into the wall on the opposite side. Others claim that echoes of children and adults can be heard around the caves, and that cold spots move around in the tannery, causing feelings of dizziness and concern. Some people feel as though they are being watched, while others feel a huge pressure around them. Our next stop are the caves under the Ye Olde Salutation Inn, which date back to 1425. The Salutation's cave system consists of rock-cut passageways, cells, chambers and chimneys, all dug out at various points in the medieval, Georgian and Victorian times. Here we learn of a ghost of a young girl called Rosie. In one of the darkest corners, visitors leave drinks, marbles and dolls for her. Back in 2016, manager Terry Webster said, "I'm a skeptic where ghosts are concerned, but I've seen things in this pub that really do make me wonder." At 6:21 morning, Webster said he was going downstairs to the pub when he heard footsteps and a cough. Thinking staff from the night before had forgotten to lock up, he ran down to the bar to nab the intruder, but there was no one to be found. A review of the pub's security footage also came up empty. Moving on, we come to Church Rock Cemetery and the catacombs, a place of rather extraordinary history and of sinister tales from bygone years. The cemetery is built on the site of the old Gallows Hill, where many men and women were hanged for their crimes, and given the number of hangings and deaths that took place here, it's not surprising there are lots of reports of ghostly sightings. Before the Rock Cemetery, this land was once a working sandstone mine, where large quantities of sandstone rock and fine grains of sand were dug out and used for building material to sell at market. It became known locally as Gallows Hill by the late 17th century, as criminals such as murderers, thieves, poachers and even tax avoiders would be tried at the Shire Hall on those charges, and if found guilty, were sentenced to death. Located on this site is Robin Hood's Cave, a place discovered in the 1800s during the landscaping by local clergyman George Oliver. He believed that he'd stumbled across a cave network that belonged to an ancient Druid temple, connected to the classic ballads and tales of Robin Hood. The likelihood is that they were just caves left over as a byproduct of the sand mining a couple of centuries before then. This area was originally known as Rope Walk because rope makers worked there. In 1892, the cave became known as Robin Hood's Mammoth Cave, but over the years this was shortened to Robin Hood's Cave. The apparition of a Victorian lady dressed in white has also allegedly been reported walking around the cemetery at night, while in the catacombs, a ghostly miner is said to roam the darkness in the entrance. Here, some visitors during tours have felt a male presence move around them. Coincidence? Or could it be the ghost of a man who, it is recorded, fell to his death through the pit ceiling sometime between the 1700s and 1800s, unaware of where he was walking? A darker presence is also felt within the fingers of the catacombs, for it is alleged that a phantom hates visitors wandering in his area, sending cold chills running down their spines and frightening anyone who sees his tall, shadowy appearance. Nobody quite knows who this negative entity is, nor why he becomes angry, wanting to harm them, but it is said that he also whispers his name in people's ears, affecting them with an overwhelming feeling of sadness. Many people have reported hearing footsteps running down the tunnels despite being alone, leaving them to wonder whether they are ghosts of the miners still running, trying to escape the cave-ins. The National Justice Museum, also known as the Galleries of Justice, has been used as a site for incarceration and punishment as far back as 600 AD. It was initially thought that it had been used in 1375 by the Normans, who had appointed sheriffs to oversee the collection of taxes and keep the peace. A role no doubt very prominent to this part of the world, if Nottingham's infamous sheriff during the days of Robin Hood is anything to go by. Archaeologists, however, discovered an entire network of caves and tunnels, which suggested the site had been used much earlier than that for imprisonment. Jail records date back to 1449, with prison cells still accessible today. Many executions took place here in the centuries that followed, with the last hanging being in 1864. For much of the 20th century, the building operated as a police station until its role as a museum, which it still is today. With so much history, it's no wonder the building is teeming with reports of supernatural activity. In the entrance hall, cleaners have said to refuse to work on their own for fear of having a ghostly encounter. Near the reception, 3 ghostly figures have been spotted, that of a soldier, a Victorian man in elegant clothes, and an old lady. In the courtroom, the sound of knocking, groaning and screaming can be heard, while strange lights and shadows have been spotted around the room. It's thought that this room is haunted by the ghosts of families of those sentenced to death here. Below the galleries of justice are the pits, and just like the caves we found earlier, they seem to possess a supernatural ambience. The feeling of being watched and the touch of a cold hand has been reported, as well as the sound of footsteps when no one is there. But the most haunted area is considered to be the chapel. Poltergeist activity has been reported here, with objects flung across the room, the sound of loud bangs and the throwing of stones, terrifying staff and visitors alike. With such a long and ancient history, is it any wonder the hall is teeming with spirits? We do hope you've enjoyed our journey through Nottingham's ghostly locations, from the magnificent Wollaton Hall to the unsettling trip to Jerusalem pub, to caves and a former hospital, and I think it's fair to say that Nottingham has not disappointed with its tales of the paranormal. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and visit our Patreon to enjoy even more exclusive ghost stories. We'll see you again soon.